This episode is brought to you by Tmpa Charities and the second annual Tmpa Clay Shoot held November 2nd at the Elm Fork Shooting Range in Dallas, Texas, benefiting the Texas Peace Officer Memorial.
And he goes, Slater, what do you want to do with your life? I say, I don't know. I have no idea. He goes, why don't you become a cop? If there's anything in life that you want, there will always be obstacles. You go over them, around them, under them, or right through them, but you accomplish what it is that you want. I said, yes, sir. He goes, that means you have to be relentless.
Hey, Blue Grit, we are back this week. Your hosts, Clint McNear and
Tyler Owen.
T.O. in the house. We have a Texas legend on today.
I wouldn't go that far.
Aaron Slater with Relentless Defender Apparel. Welcome.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate being here.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure having you on.
Before we kick off, we owe a whole lot to Slater. Slater's been a great friend to us personally, but he's been an open book with his organization to help and support. When we called about the podcast, we'd been down there on his podcast, and when we called kicking around this idea, there was no hesitation. There was no, are you guys a competitor? It was 100% immediately, bring your ass down here, look at my studio, what can I do to help you? What
Probably
do you
in those
need?
words, too. Get your ass down here.
Yep.
An open book.
It may have been verbatim.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. 100%.
What can I do to support you? What do you guys need? Come look at the studio, figure out what you get. And without Slater, without Joe King and Dallas podcast, without Tony Godwin at Catfish Cops podcast, we wouldn't be where we're at, and we're not very far, and we're a work in progress. Yeah. But Aaron Slater's been an integral part of that. Welcome here, brother. Glad to have you on.
Well, thank you for having me again.
Absolutely. So we kind of kick off the podcast as far as who you are as a person. I mean, you've got a large company, and I really want to kind of delve into how that got started. But man, tell us about you. Tell us who Aaron Slater is and where you grew up and all that kind of good stuff.
Who the hell is Aaron?
Yeah.
Well, here's what I get the most shit about is I was born in Montana, and
What's wrong with that? We're at Montana.
In Missoula.
Really?
Yes.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I love Montana.
See, we have something new we just found out.
Didn't know
Well, and what's interesting about it is I've been living here since I was in 5th grade.
Okay.
So I claim I'm a Texan. Well, my family says otherwise. They say if you aren't born in Texas, then you're not a Texan. I said, no, I'm just not a native Texan.
There you go.
And but ultimately, being born in Montana was never cool until Yellowstone came out. And then 100%. I have to remind everybody that we have a train station and you guys don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
But ultimately, born in Montana, moved to Denver, Colorado, lived in Connecticut, and then moved to Madrid, Spain. And then from Madrid, moved here in 5th grade.
So please dive off into, were you a military kid? I mean, was it?
No, my father was in the minerals business, so he was a geologist working for Exxon. And
okay.
So we bounced around from there. My parents divorced when I was living in Spain, and my mother became a single mother with 4 boys, and we moved to Houston, Texas, essentially Stafford, Texas, outside of Houston. And essentially I was raised at that point from there.
That's awesome. How was Spain growing up when you were over there?
Man, Spain was
legit.
Awesome. Yeah, it was legit. Yeah. The first, I should say, the best memory I've ever had is going to the beaches in the Mediterranean and seeing topless women everywhere.
Yeah.
And that was kind of interesting for me. But ultimately, Spain is phenomenal. I went to a school called the American School of Madrid, and that's where I learned how to speak Spanish, being immersed into the culture of it. And, of course, when you're around nothing but Spanish-speaking people, you pick it up pretty quick, especially when you're young.
Yeah, you got to.
Yeah.
You ain't gonna eat if you don't.
No, that's exactly right.
That's cool. That is cool. So came here in the 5th grade, Stafford, became ingrained, became a Texan slowly. And you're not a Yankee. I wouldn't call anybody from Montana a Yankee.
No.
Yeah. No, Yankees are on the East Coast.
There you go.
That's Northeast. In fact, you would find that a lot of Montana values are very similar to the Texas values.
100%.
So
I knew that because Yellowstone.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Sorry.
See?
Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Yep.
Exactly right.
So graduated from Stafford High?
So no, I went to Dulles High School, and so the answer is I did not graduate. I'm a high school dropout. I had a lot of trouble growing up, and ultimately I was in trouble with the police. I got into some stuff, and ultimately.
So you've always been riding around in police cars.
That's exactly right. Yeah, one
you
way
said,
or
fuck
another.
this, I'm gonna join their team. I'm done. Yeah.
Yes, you can't beat them. And so essentially, I got in trouble, and I've been out of my house since I was 16 years old, and I've essentially lived on my own since I was 16.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
What a great story. We have a bunch of folks not in law enforcement. And I mean, we have law enforcement a lot that listen, but we have a bunch of non-law enforcement. We have a bunch of young people that listen that write into the show. And what a cool story that rather than being a hindrance or saying, yeah, no, I couldn't do it, or things were tough, or I didn't graduate from high school, done a very large successful company as someone that struggled in high school dropout, and here you sit today, extremely successful, beautiful family, beautiful home. What a great testament for young people to get to see and listen to.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely. So obviously tough times, 16 years old, you moved out. At what point did you go to law enforcement? I mean, at what point did you spark your law enforcement? Where were you working at that point in time in your life?
These guys are doing a great job. I may join.
Yeah.
Well, the story is actually not an easy story. It's not a simple, hey, I just want to be a cop.
Yeah.
In fact, from my viewpoint, that was the last thing I wanted to do. And so ultimately what happened with me is living on my own. I dropped out of high school in my senior year, and then the girlfriend I was with at the time got pregnant. And so from there, I was 18 years old, having a baby.
Yeah.
And
Trying to make ends meet.
Yep. I was working full time. When I'm saying working full time, 50, 60 hours a week.
What were you doing then?
So at that point, I was working at an amusement center, but I was a manager of that. And but again, this was back in 1995, 96, and I can honestly remember making about, as a manager, like not even a mid-level, a higher level manager, I was only making $8 an hour,
Golly.
which was big time back then.
Yeah.
When
The
minimum wage
way.
was $3.25, you know. But doing that, and then I ended up moving into a townhome, essentially with my daughter's mother, and life was just kind of hard. And when I say kind of, absolutely hard. And I just remember, sitting there and trying to figure out what I'm going to do in life and how I'm going to do it, being 18 years old. And if you ever felt that time in your life, and I'm sure we all have, all the listeners have, you guys have, where you sit there and you think and you say, I don't know what else to do.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to do. And just the whole world's on top of you, and the pressures of everything is on top of you. You have this family to support, this child to support, but you can't do it because just where you're at in life. And it was just one of these days where I said, you know what, I don't even want to go home. I don't want to go home right now. I don't want to walk through that door. I just want to clear my head of whatever it is that I'm clearing my head with. And so I went back to my old neighborhood where I grew up, where my mother lived. And so I just said, you know what, let me see, maybe I just need somebody to talk to. Whatever it is, I just need somebody to talk to. So I drove down the street where my mom lived, and I'm thinking maybe she's out checking the mail, or maybe she's...
You're hoping that she is, yeah.
Something, yes.
Yeah.
And, of course, she wasn't, and I kept driving down the road, and there was, down at the end of the road on the left, there was a police officer that lived there since I had lived there, and let me back up because there's a story prior to that. When I first moved out at 16, I moved in with my friend's parents, and they accepted me in their house. And so from there, I remember sitting there, and the mother comes in and says, hey, someone just knocked on the door. There's a police officer outside. And, of course, my first thought was,
Oh, shit. They found me, yeah.
something's wrong here. So I walk outside, and when I walk outside, there's this police officer, knew that guy that I just described that lived down the road. And his name was Hal, and I walked out, and I just knew him by Officer Clarida, but I could never pronounce his name because whatever. And I just remember him turning around and looking at me and saying, "How you doing?" And I just said, I'm fine. What's up? What's going on?" You got to remember, imagine a 16-year-old kid, arms crossed, acting like I own the world, and I'm in charge, right? And he says, "Hey, I know that you're living over here, but it has nothing to do with that. What I want to tell you is if you ever need anything, call me."
Wow.
No kidding.
And I said, "Okay." And I kind of looked at it, and I was, "Well, what's the deal?" He goes, "Nothing. Just if you ever need anything, I just want to tell you that I'm here for you. You can call me."
No agenda, no angle,
Nothing,
no.
right?
What agency? What did he work for?
At the Meadows Police Department.
Damn, that's wild.
And so I literally just said, "Okay." And I kind of blew it off out of pride, that type of thing. And he
Did you
turns
think
over-
there was an agenda or something behind that, or?
I didn't know. And it was just one of those surprise things that I didn't have a thought. It was just one of those deals where I said, "Okay." And he turns around, he starts to walk off, he stops, and he turns back to me and goes, "Do you even know my name?" And I tried to pronounce it. I was like, Claire. He goes, "No, it's just Hal. Hal." And we didn't have cell phones back then, so he goes, "Just call the police department, ask for me, tell me that you want to talk to me, and I'll come by."
That's badass.
Damn.
So he gets in his car, he drives off, and that was not at all the interactions that I've had with police officers in the past.
Yeah.
And so, again, let's fast forward to where I'm at now. And I'm driving down the road and past my mother's house up, and I keep driving down. Well, on the left-hand side, he's standing outside grilling in front of his garage on the driveway. And it was one of those deals while I was driving by, I kind of see him, and I kind of see that he sees me. Well, what do? I just kind of like act like I don't see him, and I just kept driving. And where you drive around the corner, and you go down the other side of the street. And I got about halfway down the other side of the street, I just stopped. And I said, "Fuck it, why not? I have nobody else. Why not?"
And that had been a couple of years at this point since he offered.
About 2 years. So I pulled into the driveway, came back around, and I come back around, and what was interesting was you could see him almost knowing that I was coming back because he had already started walking about halfway down the driveway, and I pulled up, and he just looks at me, and I'm kind of still in my car, and he goes, "Come on." So I said, "Okay." So I get out of the car, and I walk up there, and he walks up by the grill, and he opens up a lawn chair, he puts it down, he goes, "Have a seat." So I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing here, but okay. So I sit down, and he just asks, "How do you like your hamburgers?" Of course, I said, "Cooked," right?
Yeah. Anything?
Yeah. And so I just sat down, and he just started talking. And have you ever met those guys that no matter what kind of mood you're in, no matter what's going on in the world, they're just happy. They're just, good people. They're just happy people. They're just excited people. And they just kind of change your mood just being around them.
Yep.
Well, that's what this guy was. And I probably stayed there for about 2.5 hours. I didn't say maybe 2 sentences. I just listened to him talk. And he was talking about, war stories and whatever war stories you could create, but his war stories weren't really about the
violence.
The violence. It was about, what he was able to do for people, what the pleasure that he gave to the world, and the relationships that he built, and just you could see that he was happy. Everything he talked about was happy about law enforcement, right? And it just intrigued me for that understanding of what he was getting out of it.
Probably not a lens you had ever considered seeing
Absolutely not.
That through.
Yeah, absolutely not. So I go back home, and but 2.5 hours later, and it was just one of those reset buttons where I just said, you know what, I can continue. I can figure this out, right? And still had no idea about wanting to be a police officer. That wasn't even part of my thought. And I would go over there about once every 2-3 months and do the same thing, and just eat dinner with them, and I ended up meeting his wife. His wife was great people. And so ultimately, life went on, and, you're still going through all those struggles. And when I was 20, I was sitting there one day, and he just sat and asked me, just kind of changed the entire tone of the entire conversation. And he goes, "Slater, what do you want to do with your life?" And I said, I don't know. I have no idea. He goes, why don't you become a cop? And I literally was like, hold on a second.
This guy?
Hal, you already know that I've been in trouble and all that kind of stuff. He goes, that's when you were juvenile. He goes, you understand that you can become a cop. And I said, are you serious? And I said, but I don't think I would want to be a cop. He goes, well, you seem to love sitting here listening to me talk and everything. I said, you don't get it, Hal. Your stories are not what intrigue me. It's how it makes you feel. Because I always see you happy when you're talking about it. I see, you're enthusiastic about when you're talking about it. That's what intrigues me about it. And he goes, exactly. Because you ever thought that you could get that same understanding, that same feeling from that? And I honestly internalized it, and I said, I didn't. And I thought for a second and just kind of let it sit. And I said, what do I do? How do I do it? He goes, well, you got to go to the police academy. Explained everything like we do in Texas. And I said, okay. Because if you want, I can take you down and show you how to do it and register and all that kind of stuff. I said, yeah, I think I would want to try it. So we do. We go down. He shows me how to register at the local college, and at the local college's police academy. And I get a printout for the registration, and it was like $2,700 back then. In 1997. It could have been $2.6 million. There's no way I could have paid for that.
Yeah.
Okay? There's absolutely no way. So I literally, and I didn't tell him that, I just kind of molded over and said, okay, cool, I've got the paper. And I go home, and I said, well, I've got to figure out how to make this happen. There's no way I can pay for it. So I ended up calling my father, and my father's very, very well off, if you can tell based on the first upbringing that I had. The second upbringing, my mother with 4 boys, was completely night and day of living. Okay. Yeah. So I call him, and I haven't talked to him in a long time at this point. And the conversation was very, very short and very simple. He picked up the phone. I said, Dad? He said, Aaron? I said, yeah. He says, what's going on? I said, well, I think I figured out what I want to do in life, and I was calling to see if you could help me. And he says, well, I hear you had a child. I said, I did, yeah. He goes, well, what's his name? I said, well, it's Amanda. It's her. But he goes, okay, that's a good, strong name. I said, yeah. He goes, so tell me, what do you want to do? I said, well, I think I want to be a police officer, and I was going to see if you could pay for it, and I pay you back as soon as I get a job in law enforcement. He paused for a second. It was quiet. And he says, why the fuck would you want to be a minimum wage trash man for the U.S. government?
Damn.
And I immediately got so angry. Not because he called cops minimum wage trash men for the U.S. government, but because he called the only mentor that.
Yeah.
So I internalized that, and I said,
somebody you probably looked up to more at the time than you did your dad, I guess.
Even to this day. And so I literally just said, fuck you, Dad, and hung up the phone.
Wow.
And at that moment, I just said, well, that wasn't for me. I'm moving forward, and keep doing what I'm doing. So from that point, I avoided Hal, started doing what I was doing already, working, trying to raise a family, that type of stuff. And about 3 weeks later, 2 weeks maybe, I'm driving, and I pass a patrol car, and I realize it's Hal driving. He makes a U, and the road kills me. And so he walks up, and he just looks in the window, and he leans down. He goes, what's going on? I said, nothing. He said, I thought we had a deal. I said, it's not going to happen. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, it's not going to happen. He says, come by my house after, when I get off work. I said, okay. So I do. And on honestly, I went reluctantly because I didn't want to
Right.
face it and I didn't want to talk about it. So I do, and I go over there. And this time there's no grill. There's no hamburgers being made, no food being made. It's just 2 lawn chairs out in the front driveway. You'll sit down. And he talked to me like he's never talked to me before. It was a lot more stern. It was a lot more serious. And he just sits down and he says, "Tell me what happened." And I remember when he asked me that, I literally couldn't do anything but immediately just start bawling, crying. It was one of those deals where you had, and everybody's been through it, where you have, you start building up this hope, and you start building up this plan, you start building all this, and then it just crashes down, and that's what you feel immediately. So I started bawling, crying. I've never cried in front of a man at that time. And I had my head down, and he goes, and I had already explained everything. He goes, "Hold on a second." So he gets up, and he goes inside the house, and he's in there for about 15 minutes. By that time, I had recovered and kind of composed myself, and I'm sitting there, like, wondering what he's doing. He walks back out, and he sits down, and his wife's with him, Lori, and she goes and sits down on his lap. And she says, "You know we love you, right?" I said, "Yeah." Al goes, "We're going to pay for your academy."
Damn.
So at that point, I just started crying again, and I'd never cried in front of a woman at this point, other than my mother growing up, and I felt stupid by doing it, and so I kept my head down, and she just kissed me on the forehead, and she tells me that she loved me again and went inside. And so I'm just sitting there, and he kept on saying, "Look at me," and I had my head down. He goes, "Look at me." So I'm wiping my tears off, and I lean up, and I look up, and he goes, "Do you want this?" I said, "I do." And he said, "If there's anything in life that you want, there will always be obstacles. You go over them, around them, under them, or right fucking through them. But you accomplish what it is that you want." I said, "Yes, sir." He goes, "That means you have to be fucking relentless." I said,
No shit. That's
Absolutely.
where Relentless.
That's exactly where it came from.
Wow. Speaking of crying in front of a man.
Wow.
So I did. I went to the academy. I had to work full time, so I went to the night academy. And so from that point, graduating the academy, he offered me a job essentially, and that's the agency he worked for was the Meadows. And
I want to pause real quick.
Sure.
I'm kind of visualizing how at this point. How old was Hal?
I'm sorry,
How old was he?
in his 50s.
So did he have any kids?
He did.
I'm kind of visualizing like a house that's built in the 50s style home with him and his wife. At that point in time, I would think Meadows probably doesn't pay shit. I would think at very low salary compared to other departments.
I started making $20,000 a year when I first started, so he wasn't making much more. He was a sergeant, I imagine.
And to know you now, and I'm thankful that you and I are friends, and you've got Danny. The package deal that you bring to the table is just unbelievable. And I'm going back to even not so much that night with him, but the night that he came to you 4 years prior to this. Mm-hmm. And for the listeners out there that have been on the job for any point in time or any length of time, we've been there where we've had patrol cars parked in the neighborhood, and we get the 2 o'clock in the morning, bang, 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 knock on the door, and we're like, "God damn, I'm off. Leave me alone." I'm sitting in front of a man that runs a multi-million-dollar company that has the most passion. You're also the most passionate person about law enforcement, and because of this man, 4 years prior to you giving you this, that made $20,000 a year, stopped for just a second and came over to check on you. And that relationship carried and built upon that. And I look at you now as a very iconic figure within the law enforcement community across the nation. And it's because of that one cop at a small town police department near Houston, Texas. And that, my friend, excuse my language, is absolutely fucking remarkable.
And I can tell you that, and the story continues from that, But because of that incident was a defining moment that developed who I've lived by. Danny can tell you that's my whole being is to honor that. In fact, after he told me to be relentless, I told him, I'll pay you back. I will pay you back. He said, no. The way you're going to pay me back is whatever you do, make it great. You make it great, and I will be watching, but make it great.
Wow. Well, and people in times are hard, and you have to go get new tires on your truck, and it's this or that. And for a guy back then making $20,000 to invest in someone that's not blood, a damn good chunk of money to invest in someone, there's no greater love, commitment, display of support than that. I mean, that's cool, man. And if it's funny, people talk about the cops are bad and cops this, and they don't have community policing. That's the very essence of community policing.
100%.
Most cops would have probably written you off as hoodlum. Look at this hoodlum.
Sure.
Can't live at home because he's a dumbass or whatever. And rather than taking that closed-minded view, hell, I'll just go check on him, beat on the door, and make him come out here, and I'm just going to check on him like he's a human and I'm a human. And that's at the very core, that's community policing.
Absolutely. Well, and when we get to my police officer career, that's what my whole point in even being a police officer was to try to instill that, mentor that into other cops. But I can tell you that I owe literally everything in my career, even to this day, on that person.
Wow.
Remarkable.
And I guess you've maintained that relationship. Is he still in the area?
So I started with the Meadows only because he offered me a job. It wasn't a place that I really wanted to be at. When you grow up the way I grew up with 4 boys in a household, I like to fight. Okay, it's one of those things where it just is nature, and there's competition involved, and myself or my 3 brothers, we never shied away from any fight because either we're fighting outside or we're fighting inside. There's fights, right? And so I was a very action-driven type of human being, and liked fast cars, those types of things. But I worked for the Meadows initially, and I always knew that was going to be a stepping stone for me. And so working at the Meadows, I only worked there for about 13 months, and I was looking for that next agency. And a lot of us do that in this business.
Yeah.
And so I was asking around. I knew nothing about law enforcement. Even when I got in law enforcement, it was so new to me that I didn't know much else about what was going on in the world of law enforcement other than what I just knew. And I started asking everybody, hey, where would you go? Where would you go? Where'd you go? And everybody kept pointing me to Rosenberg Police Department, Rosenberg. And I was thinking, Rosenberg, that's like out in the country, it's a little bitty. And they were like, no, if you want to get into action, go to Rosenberg Police Department. So I started looking into it, and sure enough, I applied and ended up getting hired at Rosenberg, and 100% they were right. It was one of these agencies that you could take a cookie cutter out of some major metropolitan, grab it and move it out, and you're going to do every single thing that you could possibly imagine doing at any large agency, but isolated in the city. And so ultimately, I completely excelled at that agency because it met every single criteria that I wanted, with the exception of money. But I can tell you right now, when I first started, I was getting paid $20,000 a year. I felt like a king.
Yeah.
They were paying me to do this, And then when I started with Rosenberg, I maybe got about a $6,000 pay raise, and I was like, wow, I mean, where's the mansions I can start buying and stuff?
Yeah.
But I didn't care about that. I literally just wanted to come to work, and I wanted to do, God's work, and a lot of that is in the agency that I worked for. There was a lot of drugs, a lot of gangs, a lot of that aspects, and I thrived on that. I loved it. I was there for about a year and a half, and I got a phone call early in the morning, about 7 o'clock in the morning. And it was from the Meadows Dispatch. And she says, "Hey, Slater," and at that time I was working night shift. And I was just getting off, and they said, "Hey, Slater, Hal just got in an accident." And I said, "What happened?" They said, "Well, he was on a traffic stop, and a lady came and hit the back of his car, and it pinned him underneath his own patrol car." And they of course, rescue got there. They ended up life flighting him. And so ultimately, the goes to the hospital, and I'm like, okay, what? And I head over there. You head over there. One of the most interesting things that I saw was when you get there, you see all these cops that come together. Didn't matter what patch, didn't matter what badge, didn't matter what color uniform. People just come out of the woodwork when an officer is injured. And in fact, even in today's time and throughout my career, we question brotherhood. Is it brotherhood real? Is this legitimate? It is most definitely in times of need like that, and we see it in the funeral aspects. We see it in the emergency aspects, not necessarily in the day-to-day operations, but definitely in those times.
Yeah.
And when you see that, and for me, I saw it, and that was the first time I ever seen it in law enforcement. And for the first time, I said, this is what family looks like. This is why a lot of us get involved in this. And so he spent some time in the hospital, and he had some serious internal injuries. And then he was released to go back home. But again, he was done medically. And so they retired him medically, and about 3 months after that, in May of 2020, I get another phone call about 3 o'clock in the morning, and he had a heart attack and everything shut down and ended up dying. So from there, honestly, I was kind of just mad at the world. Even to the point where on my POV, anybody that worked with me back then wondered how I even got away with it. But even on my POV, on my license plate, it just had FTW, and I literally just hated the world. It worked for me, though. It worked for me as a police officer.
From losing Hal specific, or losing Hal opened up all the other tribulations, or
maybe a combination. Yeah, maybe a combination of things.
This is 2000, May of 2000.
Right.
Okay.
And so I went to work mad. I went to work angry. Lived angry. Ended up getting a divorce from my first wife. And but I can tell you that in many ways it worked for me as a police officer in that environment. There wasn't any hesitation. I had very little fear of doing anything on the job. And ultimately, it was one of those things I just didn't care. I didn't care what happened to me. I didn't care what happened to anybody. And in many ways, it worked for me to the extreme of, they would put me in the worst areas of the city and that type of thing, and I would be the sweep guy. I'd be the clean guy, right? I'd go out there and I would be the one that arrested all the dope dealers, all the gangbangers, that type of stuff, and I loved it. And I can tell you that one day I was sitting in front of a house in the hood, and I just remember, and you guys probably remember this. Remember when we had the handwrite reports?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've been in that long time.
Well, out there at the cusp, started in 03. So.
Okay, exactly, right? We used to have the handwrite reports, which sucked, by the way. Yeah. Because when you turned them in, your sergeant would write it all over and hand it back, and you have to rewrite it. But either way, I was
really
handwriting.
Hard to write them in the rain.
No, yeah, exactly. But I was handwriting a report, and while I was handwriting a report, 7:15 in the morning, out of the corner of my eye, I see this little black lady walking from her house down. And imagine, a shotgun type shack. Probably been there since the 30s, okay? And I see her in the corner of my eye, so I turn around and look, and I roll down the window, and I said, yes, ma'am. And I just remember her looking in, and she says, are you okay? And I said, yes, ma'am, I'm fine. And she says, okay, would you like some coffee? And I said, no, ma'am, I'm fine. I don't drink coffee. And she goes, okay, well, if you need anything, I'll just be right up here on this porch. I said, okay, kind of brushing her off. And I rolled my window back up, and I start writing my report again. And I don't know what it was, but something just said, why not?
Another angel came to check on you.
Right. So I get out of the car, I walk up. She's sitting on the porch, and she's probably 180 years old, because you could see the cataracts in her eyes.
Yeah. And
you know that she couldn't see very well. So it took me all the way to get to her porch for her to notice I was there. And I just remember her kind of like jumping up like, yes, sir. And I said, ma'am, you know what? I'll drink some coffee. So she goes, oh, and her excitement was to come out and break the chair and kind of brush off the chair for me like I was somebody special to her. And she said, sit down. So I do, and I go and sit down. She goes inside. While she's inside, I'm waiting out there for about 10 minutes, and she walks back out, and she's holding this porcelain cup that was huge, but it had like coffee stains all on it. This must have been handed down from generation to generation, and she hands it to me. She goes, here you go. And I look inside this coffee, and I really wasn't a coffee drinker then. And I look at it, and it was so black it was kind of syrupy. And so I didn't know what to do with it. I just knew that people drink this shit. So I go and I start sipping on it, and it was to this day, was the most disgusting cup of coffee I've ever had in my entire life, right? So I'm sitting there with this cup of coffee in an awkward silence. And she says, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah, absolutely. She goes, I'm born and raised here. Born and raised right here in this house. I said, okay. She says, why is it that police officers treat us all like we're criminals? And I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, just understand, I don't like the gangbangers. I don't like the drug dealers. In fact, I wish they'd all go away. But when you guys come over here, you treat us all like we're gangbangers and drug dealers, just because where we live. And I thought about it for a second, and I said, I had nothing else to say except for, you know what, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for that. And she goes, no, not you, baby. You're one of the nice ones. When in all reality, she was describing who I was. And I said, no, ma'am, I just want to tell you I'm sorry for that. And I got so awkward that I didn't know what else to do except for act like I got a call. And I said, yeah, it's clear. So I take the coffee and I put it down. And I said, ma'am, I got to go. So I jump off the porch and I start walking. And she goes, Officer Slater? And I turn around and she says, you never even asked me my name. If you want to talk about guilt on top of guilt, that's exactly what that was. And she had enough care to even read my name tag.
That's the second person to check on you and ask you, do you even know my name?
That's right. That's exactly right. So she tells me her name. Her name was Ida. I said, okay, Miss Ida, I appreciate that. And so I get in the car and I drive off. And I go and I sit in a parking lot. And I just kind of reflect about that conversation. And the one thing that kept on going in my head over and over and over again was, make it great. Whatever you do, make it great. So at that very moment, I said, there's got to be something more to law enforcement than just hooking motherfuckers up and going after the fucking wolves of society. Now, there's an aspect of that, and there's a huge aspect to that we all love. But at that moment, one thing that Hal used to always tell me, and he was a training officer for me for a little while, and he said, wave at everybody. And I said, do what? He said, wave at every single person. If they don't wave back, just put your hand underneath that car and say, well, then fuck you then. But he said, wave at everybody. And I said, okay. Well, I never took that understanding. I never really worked on it until this defining moment. Everything came together for me.
How old were you when you met Masada?
I was probably 23, 24. Yeah.
And that's still, like all of us, young cop in your early 20s, on to drive fast,
That's
smash heads, put people in jail, not thinking about some of the other aspects that are as important.
And yeah, that's exactly right. And the one of the things that I do, and I've tried to do ever since I've really become in that understanding as an FTO and then as a sergeant and lieutenant and training and those types of things, is try to instill that early on. Because a lot of cops don't get it yet. And then a lot of cops go through their entire careers and don't get it. So from that understanding, I would take officers in the FTO program, and I was an FTO, and I trained officers for quite a while I was on patrol. But I would always get the officers during the last few phases because I was the guy that taught them how to become cops. Because remember, I'm a high school dropout, so I couldn't spell worth a shit. I couldn't write worth a shit. And so ultimately, I was the guy that taught them how to
be the police.
Be the police, okay?
Yep.
And so ultimately, I had a reputation. But after that understanding of something inside that just said, no, you know what, there's something bigger than this. They'd get in the car, and the first thing I would tell them is, and of course, I already had this pre-notion about what I am, what they're about to get into and everything. And I said, hey, you know what, while you're here, while you're with me, I want you to wave at everybody. And they were like, bullshit. And I'm like, no, I'm serious.
We're going to throw candy too, or are we going to?
Right? And I said, no, just wave at everybody. And I gave them the same spiel that was given to me. And so I would drive them into the nicer areas of the city, and it was easy for them to wave. Easy for them to wave. They'd wave. And so ultimately, I would go and I'd start taking them over to what we called the north of the tracks, or La Colonia area and that type of stuff. And their whole demeanor would start changing. You'd start seeing them like stretching, cracking the knuckles. I mean, just their entire demeanor would change. And I don't blame them, because a lot of this is new to them. It was a new experience for me, that type of stuff as well. Yeah. But I remember we'd be driving, and of course, this isn't a specific story. It's more of a scenario of the understanding of the totality of it. But we'd be driving, and we'd go on the north side, and we'd be passing up people. Not one time would he wave, or not one time would she wave, or whatever the case may be. And I would recognize this, and imagine driving by an 8-year-old that's standing on the side of the road in their own driveway and just kind of watching. And the interesting thing about being a police car is that car is a billboard driving around. It's a marketing tool, and nobody misses it. They see it from a mile away. So when an 8-year-old boy is sitting there on his driveway and he sees us coming, and his parents have told him that we are the enemy, and we don't even wave, that's a problem.
We confirmed what the parent told him.
That's exactly right. So we would drive by, and I would see us every now and then. We all played these games as FTOs, and I would sit there and stop the car and be like, boom, you just got shot. Where you at? And, of course, the panic on their face would be, I don't know. I say, okay, we'll get out of the car. And then what do? Run down the stop sign, because that's the only place that you're going to figure out where you're at. So they would do that, and I would go down there, and I'd pull up next to them. I'd say, all right, so where you at? And they would say Avenue A and 7th Street. I say, okay. I say, you know how to get to Walnut in Houston, which is on the other side of the hood? They say, yeah. I say, okay, I'll meet me over there. And I'd drive off. And I'd go wait, and I'd sit there. It'd take about 30 minutes to walk from that part to that part. And they would always merge out, walking like the shit, right? And I'd say, get in the car. They'd get in the car. I'd say, you okay? Yeah, why? You talk to anybody? No. You walked all the way from there to over here. Nobody talked to you at all. Police officer walking through the hood. Nobody said the damn word. Well, I mean, somebody pulled up next to me and was like, hey, sir, you okay? And I said, what'd you say? Yeah, I said, I'm okay. Another person asked, do I need the police? And I said, no, I am the police, right? I said, so they were checking on you. Yeah, nobody hurt you? No? Okay. So what do you get out of that? I don't know. I said, get out of the car. They'd be like, serious? I said, get out of the car. They'd get out. I said, come here. I get out with them. I'd walk them up. I'd say, Ms. Ida, this is Officer so-and-so.
I was about to ask you, did you ever see Miss Ida again?
All the time. I said, this is Officer so-and-so. And I said, and he loves coffee.
Tune in next week for part 2.
I'm a huge believer that leadership isn't bars, stars, and stripes. Those are ranks, okay? Leadership is the people that have influence within your department that may not necessarily be ranked. And I got fired in July of 2014. And on January 10th of 2015, Danny comes in, and she had just checked the mail, getting home from work, and she's got our tax paperwork for our house, and it's a property tax, and we owed $6,566. So that next morning I woke up, I went into my office, sat there, and I put my headphones on like I am right now, and I just sat there and I started drawing, and I came up with a design, and it was that the gladiator helmet with the blue line through it. Right? All I put was a Relentless Bleed Blue. So ultimately, I'd sold a few shirts, and then I kept pushing it every day. I remember going into the bathroom, and she was in there curling her hair, and I said, babe, she turned around and said, I've got the money for the tax. Here's the understanding of things. I owed $6,566. In 7 days, I made $6,568.
My bones don't lie, they're broken, but they still got fight. I'm only getting started. I'm only getting started. You set my fire, those flames are getting higher and higher. I'm only getting started. I'm only getting started. I'm only getting Scrape gravel from the palm of my hands, skin weathered from the wind and sand. From the valley where I used to live, I'm the storm heading over that ridge. Yeah, my bones don't lie, they're broken, but they still got fight. I'm only getting started. I'm only getting started. You set my fire, those flames are getting higher and higher. I'm only getting started. I'm only getting started. I'm bleeding now, but my fear is gone. I'm hollowed out, but I carry on. My bones don't lie, they're broken, but they still got fight. I'm only getting started. Yeah, I'm only getting started.